Father's Day is almost upon us. It's a wonderfully celebrated holiday. It comes in right after the Mother's Day celebration as well. And for most men, including myself, I have been blessed with 4 beautiful children. And through one of my children, I have 2 grandchildren. So for Father's Day for me is especially a beautiful holiday. And you know, I wake up in the morning and the kids, now they're all adults of course, but the young men and young women in my life, my children, we wind up meeting at some point on the Father's Day. This year, like every year, it falls on a Sunday. And usually we'll come over and have a barbecue, and we may hang out in the yard, and they bring cards and perhaps a gift or something like that. But you know, I kind of discourage the gift stuff, but they do it anyway, of course, and it's really great. And the grandkids come over, and you know, they run up and jump on my lap, and I get called Papa, you know, which is a title I'm still kind of getting used to be honest with you guys. It's been about 3 years, but I officially got declared a Papa about 3 years ago, and I absolutely love it. That being said, though, for myself, on a personal level, my dad went into spirit almost 6 years ago now. My dad was not only my best friend, he was my best friend, and he was also my hero. You know, my father served very honorably in World War II, a time in a war of many generations ago. He served 4 years in the United States Navy. He spent much of his time in the Atlantic Fleet, running after the German Nazi submarines, and I remember him very clearly sharing the stories with me about the release of the depth charges and what they called hedgehogs. These were weapons of war, weapons of destruction, and they went after the German submarines. And I remember him, and you know, my dad was a very tough guy, a very heroic guy, but he also had a very big heart. He really did. And I remember him telling me how his heart broke because he knew when they were killing those young Germans that many of those young men sent here by Germans to attack America, and rightfully so. We had to defend our home nation and our country. And my father did what he had to do, of course, being a very, very proud, patriotic U.S. citizen. But he also said, you know, I know some of those young men in those submarines that we killed was 17, 18 years old, and they were forced into combat, forced into war, and they'll never go home to their moms and dads again. They'll never see their families again. And I remember him kind of turning and touching the side of his face because he knew that he had no choice, but he had to, you know, participate in their death. But he also at the same time knew they were human beings. He also knew that they were driven by the insanity of the Hitler regime, and many of them, as I stated, were driven into combat against their will in some cases, in many cases. People don't really realize that. And I remember that bothered him. And later on, my dad, whose name was Ed, by the way, my father's name was Ed. His full name was Edgar, E-D-G-A-R, like Edgar Rice Burroughs, the author of Tarzan, or J. Edgar Hoover, the great FBI director back in the 30s and 40s. My father really didn't care for his name. His name was coming out of the Norwegian people. My father's father was Norwegian of descent, and they're very proud Norwegian people. In particular, my grandfather, who I knew, my dad would always call my grandfather a throwback Viking, meaning that my grandfather was really almost like a barbarian, not in the sense of being crazy on the streets, even though he also served in the military. My grandfather was one of the great U.S. Marines who served his time in World War I. And being a great U.S. Marine, my grandfather not only was very, very proud as an American, but he also had that extraordinary courage and valor that the Marines display. And he went on later to actually fight a fist fight for a living, bare knuckle fighting in saloons and bars up and down the New York harbors, the waterways. He was considered to be this really wild man, And he was. That was my grandfather. And my father, being his son, didn't take on the same characteristics, but he exemplified a great deal of my grandfather's courage and toughness too. My dad and my grandfather both went on to serve in law enforcement, both of them, and my father in particular went on to be entered into the Honor Legion of the NYPD for valor and for courage in the line of duty, and he was given a lot of commendations and credits for his work as a police officer. And that resonates in my soul to this day. From my grandfather to my dad, we fly our flag 365. We are very, very much a back the blue family. We are very, very proud American people, and we are deeply dedicated to our country. So that's kind of what formed my upbringing. And that being said, when you have that alliance, especially with my dad, who I saw pretty much every day of the week. My parents and I happened to live nearby each other. We live in my hometown, and I never really wandered a great distance away from them, not because I was, you know, a mama's boy. It was just the fact that my family was here, and I love Long Island, and I love my community. And I traveled the world. You know, I spent Europe, and I was in Japan, and all through the out west of the great USA, and I spent a lot of time traveling. But I always came back home to my hometown, which is in Merrick, New York, and my parents were not far away, and I made it my business to spend as much time with my mom, my dad, my brothers as I could. I got married along the way, of course, and raised my own family, but I was very proud and very fortunate, extremely fortunate, to have very, very loving parents, and who were married for 67 years, you know. But as Father's Day approaches, as it does often within my heart, my Father's Day is 365, as is my Mother's Day is 365. I often reflect on my parents, not in a morose way or an overly maudlin way where I'm weeping and crying all the time, but I do make frequent visits to our cemetery. I do change the flowers at their grave. I do step out of my car and step onto the soil, put my knee in the earth and pat it. And I say, Dad, Pop. I call my father Pop. Hey, Pop, it's Rob, it's me. I want you to know how much I appreciated you being my father. I want you to know that I always felt safe in your arms. I want you to know that your courage and your great respect for our American values are alive and well in my home. I say the same thing to my mom's soul and to my baby brother that crossed and so on. But most importantly, this is about Father's Day. So that's really, I want to echo these sentiments. I actually wear my father's police shield ring. If you've ever seen me in public, when I do my work, I wear my dad's police shield ring. I wear it proudly in honor of my father's memory. My experiences with my father were very beautiful throughout my lifetime. But a little bit about my pop, in that my dad had just a basic high school education. He wasn't a very, what we would call a bright guy or a very intelligent guy. His intelligence was not book smart, but boy, was he a professor of life. He could make somebody, he could read somebody, I don't mean psychically read, but he had a street sense, a gut wisdom about himself that brought him through the very tough streets of New York, through Brooklyn, for many, many, many years as a police officer. He was well respected on the job, and this was the kind of wisdom, his intelligence of being was what I was raised on. And it was very much a big part of my life. And my values, and much of the values of my children, I hope reflect the spirit of my dad. I'm passing down what was given to me with a little twist and a turn here and there, but fundamentally, the man that I am, whatever that may be, good or bad, is a direct reflection of my dad and, of course, my beautiful mother as well. But my dad really had a very, very good relationship with me. He loved boxing. He loved what was called today WWE. He loved that wrestling stuff. He used to take me to all these crazy wrestling tournaments where we go see the great Bruno San Martino, for those of you guys that go back some time, and Haystacks Calhoun and all of these crazy wrestling guys. And we spent a lot of good time together. And when I close my eyes and I think of him, frankly, all I do is really kind of smile. My dad was a very funny man. He was full of humor, great compassion, and really a lot of love. So that's memories of my dad. I'm just giving it to you very brief, but I want to move off of my own father for a minute and talk about you guys out there. Not everybody has these kind of memories. You know, the father figure is the protector of the family. He is supposed to be the protector of the family. He's supposed to be the protector of his wife, of his bride. He is the, quote, the working drive behind the household. I'm not minimizing, of course, the role of the mother, but please understand I grew up in the 50s and 60s where the male figure went out to work and the mom figure stayed at home, and she was the cooker and the sewer, and she did all that stuff, which was not really true with my mother, to be very candid. My mother was a medical professional. She was a very bright girl, and that didn't really occur a great deal in my home. However, the tempo, the standard of the culture at that time was the man went out into the streets, the mother stayed around the schools and PTA and baked cookies and did all that kind of stuff. You know, today it's a very different world, and quite frankly, I'm very glad of it. I think having daughters of my own, and one of my daughters being a mom herself, that maturing identity, that professional style, that independent working female, I think is a great asset, and I'm very delighted my daughters have embraced it. And I wish it for my granddaughters too. But going back to my male role models, not all fathers carry those traits. Some of them can be very abusive verbally. Some of them feel the role of the father is just to raise a child, not to integrate with the child, not to be the child's friend. They don't offer affection. They don't offer love and kindness. They just tell them what to do. They direct them to do this, direct them to do that. They serve only as the influence of punishment. Example, you've heard this before, I am sure. When your father gets home, I'm going to tell him what you did, and then you're going to be in big trouble, implying you're going to get a strap, or you're going to get locked in your room, or you're going to be yanked outside by your neck. And the father figure becomes one that can not only run the house, but he can also run the house through a reign of terror and abuse. And that, to me, is not a father. And I know a lot of you out there have endured some version of that, some less, some more. I'm sorry, where the dad figure has been taught, has been culturally driven to act like that. And if you add in elements such as alcohol or other elements of distracted behavior, that man can turn into a monster and can make a child be very, very frightened. And that child grows up experiencing the male role model as an abusive image. He sees the male role model abusing the wife or abusing the mother. He sees the male role model abusing the children. He can see the male role model being very frightening. And it takes great instinct, great counseling, great wisdom to break that cycle, because one day, if you're a young man growing up in that environment, you don't want to model that kind of behavior. Being firm and directing and having a sense of discipline and, of course, setting a standard of good moral behavior in your home is important, of course. But many men take on the role way past that. And they feel because they are a man and they're powerful, usually they run the money in the house, that they become the dominant dictator type of personality. And then I meet guys on the other side. I've met many, many people in my work whose fathers are very soft, very quiet, very removed. The mother seems to be the driving force of the family. He becomes only like a supplicant, just some kind of sidebar guy. And the image of the male is very, very weak, very, very soft, very, very pliable, kind of like putty in the hands of the wife or the mother figure. And that's the image that is portrayed. And one has to, perhaps ask, what is it within the woman who is seeking a man that she can just manipulate and control, some kind of play toy for her? And what kind of man wants to dominate a female and make her a play toy for him? In both cases, they're kind of a perversion of love in a relationship where both people stand side by side and support each other. We all kind of teeter from time to time, sure. but fundamentally you want someone that stands at your side and you weather the storms of life, no matter what they are. And people look to the dad. When there's a bump in the night, you're at home, laying in bed, looking at the ceiling, ready to sleep, and there's a thump or a dong-dong on the front door at 1 a.m., and no one's supposed to be knocking on your door at 1 a.m., the first person that's supposed to be at that door is the dad. Right? You want that person to be there and stand up and face whatever may be outside and take on the challenges first, to protect his wife, to protect his children, if there are pets or whatever, to protect them too. And many men fall very short of that, and many men don't. Don't misunderstand me. There are many great fathers out there, but there are also men, for whatever reasons, through their conditioning, their own upbringings, their cultural attitudes, just don't see it. They just don't get it, you know. So if you're a child of a great dad, if you're a child or a byproduct of a so-so dad, if you're a byproduct of a really abusive kind of a guy, all of that, you cannot undo the past about the way your father was. And the key, of course, is to see the personality that flowed through this male figure, through the biological male. This is what flowed through him, right? Through all of his sufferings, all of his sorrows, through all his frustrations, through all of his fears. This is what you received as a child growing up under that roof. And for some children, it can be very disapproving. They withdraw. By the time they're 14 or 15 or 16, they're looking to run away from home. They threaten their father. They say, don't ever touch my mother again, or I'll come back and do something terrible to you. There are young men that I've met that go into the military just to escape it. Guys go into other lifestyles. They run away to college if they can afford it, or they just go on a plane, or they take a car ride or a motorcycle, and they just leave. They abandon the whole thing. And in my case, like I shared earlier, it was the complete opposite. Because of the friendship I had, because of the safety sense that I had, it was natural for me to gravitate around the people I love so much, which were my parents, especially my pop, you know, in terms of being a guy. You know, it was a guy thing, you know. Now, there are also these fathers coming up that are newborn children, right? Their children just were born. They just got blessed. Their wife and themselves had union, and 9 months later, a little one comes into the world, and there is this extraordinary thrill of being a dad, and of course, for the woman being a mother, perhaps for the first time, or even the second, or third, or fourth time, but especially the first time. And you know, when a woman has a baby for the first time, and it's a healthy little one, or even if it's got some nurturing issues or health issues as the child develops into this life, the family tends to cluster around the woman. And it should, and it does. It's just natural. You hover around the female, you hover around the nest, the birds kind of chirp, the other females kind of chirp around, and the men are kind of on the perimeter. You know, the women are back in the bedroom wooing and cooing the wife, the mom, the new mom, looking at the baby in the bassinet, looking at the new mom in the crib, and they're all talking about the baby, and how's the mother, and how's your tummy, and how's this, and how's that. And you'll see the guys out in the living room, and they'll be either having a can of beer, or they'll just be shooting the breeze. They're out on the deck, and the TV's on, and the Yankee baseball game is on. And then at some point they get up, and everybody comes out for dinner, and they're all talking, and they're slapping the guy on the back and shaking his hand and kissing him and all that. And the father leans over and kisses the baby and puts the baby back. And there is this natural, not a separation because of lack of love, but it's almost an instinctive understanding that the female has to kind of dominate for a while. You know, not dominate in the sense of telling you what to do or get away, just that there's a overwhelming biological instinctive reaction to hover around her child. It is normal. It's not a possessiveness. It's just a normal reflex within the mom. It just is. And the dad's role instinctively is to make sure that they stay safe, right? So this father, this young man who has never had that button pushed in his soul, right? You're a young guy, you're a teenager, perhaps you played sports, maybe you're a musician, maybe you're an artist, maybe you're just a volunteer worker, perhaps you're going into the military, whatever your role is, it doesn't matter, right? and you're out and you're doing, quote, all of the guy things that guys will typically kind of do, whatever that may be. And the next thing you know, you have hopefully fallen in love with someone, and you have a relationship with that person, and you decided, not by accident, but you have hopefully decided to bring a child into the world, and that your nest has a clean experience, that your nest is well provided for the best you can, that you can bring the child into a safe setting. But this instinct within that father has now been pushed. This button, this unseen but magical button, has been pushed, and he is suddenly thrust into the world of fatherhood. And that is something to celebrate this Sunday, because it's not something he's ever experienced before. It's a day-to-day, moment-to-moment journey into the challenges of love. And that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. With all its frustrations, with all of its fears, with all of its worries, with all of the trepidations connected to it, being a dad is probably the greatest blessing I've ever received. This is my buddy Danny right over here. He's always at my side running around. How you doing, bud? That's my boy. Okay. So, excuse me, Dad. So, being a dad to this guy, to my dog, he's my son, he's my companion, he's my buddy. He's not just an animal that lives in my house. That's my child, that dog. His name is Danny Boy, and we love him. I love him just like my own children. There's no difference. Anyway, getting back. So you have that new kind of a father coming up the road, and the experience of having that baby puts a light in his eyes. It makes him stand taller. His chest comes out, or at least I think it should, and you come forward and you offer your heart and soul not only to the mother of the child, the source of life itself, right? But you also offer yourself to that child and say, I am your dad, and on my watch, no harm will come to you if I can do anything about it. And that's a dad. There are many men that can father a child, right? Anyone can have procreation instincts and run into a bedroom somewhere and have intimacy and create a child with a woman that participates, and suddenly he's gone, like vapor. Poof! He's off playing in the casinos. Poof! He's off back in the bars. Poof! He's off back with some other woman. Poof! He's all back gambling. He just doesn't want any part of it. His whole soul falls into a bottle of booze. Whatever it is. He doesn't want to be a dad. He just wants to be a man who had a kid. You know, and with respect to those people that have that kind of an experience growing up, Father's Day can be very painful. It can shoot arrows into your head because you remember that you were never really loved. You were just created in some situation. And from there on, it's almost all survival instincts, right? But for most men that I've met and most guys I know, and I hope this will be true of my sons one day if they're blessed to get married and have children, because they're only in their early 20s right now. You know, marriage today is a little bit frowned down the road for them. I hope on some level they get the soul of my father, my grandfather, perhaps me, to help guide them into how to raise a child in a good home with a good family. And then you have these guys that their wives and they can't have a child. You know, they can't bear a child. They try and they try. They go to specialists. They go to doctors. Something just doesn't allow the Mother Nature to kick in, and they can't bear a child in the soul. And they decide to become adoptive parents. And these beautiful people decide to take on someone else's baby, a child that somehow in this world could not be received or accepted or able to stay in the boundaries of its natural parenting. And beautiful people come in and they raise this child as their own. The child becomes their own. Let's get it clear. When a mother or a father, but especially with the father, right, the idea of being called a dad and a mom is based in behavior and love, not just by the reflex of procreation, right? I mean, in my work, many people over my years, 25 plus years of working in this field, that said, you know, I wish I knew who my birth mother was. I wish I knew who my birth father was. There is always this lament Some of them go through Ancestry.com or some research site to try to locate them. But the point is, there's always that kind of that twist that says somehow I wasn't wanted or I couldn't stay. And I'd like to know why, or at least like to know what happened. And that's a natural instinct for many of them, not all, but for many. It's understandable. And whether they pursue it or not is a personal thing, right? But the people that take on those children, the people that raise those babies, the people that hold them in their arms and are up at 3 in the morning and go to graduations and go to doctor's offices and take them to ball games and put them on their knee and kiss them goodnight and let them know they're safe. Those are wonderful fathers, wonderful. And, being a guy, we're not supposed to be frightened. We're not supposed to be this. We're not supposed to be that. We're not supposed to express fear. We're not supposed to express nervousness. We're always supposed to be the pillar of granite, all that kind of stuff. This almost like image you try to maintain. And I think if you really get to the average guy, the average man, he'll say, listen, I got fears, I have anxieties, I have worries, I have doubts. But you work through them, of course. But you try to teach your children that life can be really beautiful and loving and compassionate. It requires also dedication, perseverance, great courage. It takes great courage to get up and hit it every day and go to work every day and come home every night and pay the bills and put your own needs aside, and you do what you have to do for the love of your children and your wife. It takes courage. It's much easier to take the easy way out, to lie, cheat, and steal yourself through somebody's life, right? So you have the new guys coming up this Sunday who may have just had a baby. They may have just had their first baby. This is their first Father's Day. How awesome. And congratulations to you guys for bringing your first one into the world. And it might be your 6th in the world. If you want to have 6, God bless you. Whatever it might be, just congratulations if you had a new baby this year. If you've adopted a beautiful baby, congratulations. And thank you for being one of the beautiful souls that sees love in a child who needs someone to take care of them. And you may be one who has a wife who's ready to blossom. Her tummy is starting to expand, her soul is beginning to grow, and the light of a child is beginning to break through her, and you're on the edge or getting ready to be a father, the expectation of being a father. How awesome. I remember it with me and my wife, and I remember how excited I was and how nervous I was. You can't help it. It's like winning the Super Bowl. It's just beyond that. But I think you get my point. It's just an incredible experience. Those guys may not have the child in the room yet, but Father's Day is just a shout away. And they too are about to engage on a journey beyond all measure. Being a father, for me, I'm talking about me now, and I can speak on behalf of my own father too, I know it. Was the greatest and the singular greatest gift of my life. It really was, and still remains, the greatest singular gift of my life. And many of us, like me, I miss my dad. I do. I mean, there are times I sit in my back room and I see his picture, or I hear a voice recording of his from something, or I see an old video or an old piece of footage or just an old photo. And I can feel like this bubble rising in my chest, this pain in my heart. I can feel it. It's just natural. And I don't try to get rid of it, make believe it's not. I feel it. I'll throw myself on the floor, but I feel it. And I say, Pop, I miss you. I love you. I know you're around me. I mean, in the work I do, good gracious, I really feel it. I'm not grieving. I just miss him. I miss him. I do. I miss his laughter. I miss his touch. I miss walking with my father. I miss holding my hand behind his neck and picking him up out of the chair when he got older. My dad died at almost 95 years old. In the last years of my father's life, he had Alzheimer's. My father was, his mind went quiet about 5 years before he died, maybe 6. So for the last 6 years of my dad's life, he didn't know me. Didn't recognize me. He would just stare at me and look at me, and I said, Dad, it's Rob. It's me, Pop. I'm right here. And he would just look at me like, quiet, or just didn't realize who I was. And that broke my heart. I have to be honest. I mean, when my father didn't know who I was, I'm his oldest son, I'm his oldest child. It definitely hurt my heart. But in all fairness, in all honesty, I understood it. And I knew that my relationship with my father, the love of my father, was born way past the images of the face and the sound coming out of my mouth and the appearance of my skin. It resonated deeply within me, within my soul. And I'm sure that's true for so many of you who had great fathers and have great fathers. And if they are living in your world and they're elderly or they're sick or they're in trouble or they're wounded or they limp or they cough or they need medicine or how minds are going, as best as you can, you honor them and you love them and you take care of them and you forgive them for their trespasses, right? You forgive them as best as you can for being flawed and broken and the mistakes they have made, because you too and I too have made these mistakes. And if you don't offer forgiveness, then forgiveness will be denied, and make no mistake about that. If you forgive, you shall be forgiven. Right? It doesn't mean you have to forget everything. It could be some rough spots in there. I'm not saying there aren't unpleasant moments for a lot of people. I'm not denying that. And I'm not saying perhaps distance was the best way to get away from it all. Right? I'm not saying that. I'm not telling you go back and throw yourself on a sword. But what I am saying is to understand that no one wanted to live with those wounds. No one wants to live so terribly wounded and angry and hurt and upset and distant and cold their entire lives. Nobody chooses that path. It is a path driven down their throat by life and perhaps by the people prior to them, you know. So as we come into this Father's Day, if you're preparing to have a child, if you have children, if you have grandchildren, right? If you're the role of a grandfather, you represent the male image, the evolved, seasoned man. You become kind of a book of knowledge, as it were, to the whole family. You are the patriarch, the leader of the band. And you may walk with a little bit of a slower step. Your back may not be standing as straight. Your eyes may not be as clear. You may have to lean forward when you are listening to people. But in your soul, there is a history. You have gotten far. You have weathered the storms. You have stood up against it all. And if you look to your left and you look to your right, those that remain are still at your side. And you are very blessed. They may be in California. They may be living in the great state of Texas. They may be up in Alaska, one of the beautiful parts of our country. But internally, in your soul, they are there. And for some people coming into this Father's Day, like myself, I have lost my baby brother. I lost my brother's child. We have endured great suffering in my family, you know. And sometimes those memories will come up. What could have been, should have been, didn't happen, could have happened. All of those thoughts come into play. So there's a lot that goes on with this experience. And this Father's Day is just another day on the calendar, yes, but it is also a day of focused attention, devotion, respect, love, compassion, forgiveness, and family. So on behalf of my family to yours, I want to wish all of you a very blessed, a very happy, and a very fruitful Father's Day. Thank you for being with me. Have a great day.